Welcome back, everyone, to The Deep Dive. This is where we really get into the heart of the Baha'i writings, right here on Baha'i On Air.
I'm genuinely really looking forward to the journey we're starting today. It promises some pretty profound insights, I think. Before we jump in, though, just a quick note for all of you listening. If you're getting something valuable out of these deep dives, if they're adding to your understanding, could you do us a quick favor? Please take just a second right now to subscribe and follow the channel. We looked at the numbers, and actually a pretty big chunk of our listeners, about 46%, aren't subscribed yet. And honestly, your subscription makes a huge difference. It really helps us keep bringing more of this kind of content to you. So yeah, please hit that subscribe button.
Absolutely. And we are just thrilled today to kick off something really special, a 4-part deep dive series. We're going to be unpacking a truly monumental text, God Passes By. And this isn't just any book. I mean, it's a profound historical narrative of the first 100 years of the Bahá'í Faith, written by Shoghi Effendi, the Guardian. So our mission, really, over these next 4 days is to pull out the crucial insights from this history. We want to understand its significance from a Baha'i perspective, of course, but also, explore how these events, these themes, can actually offer deep relevance for our own lives, and maybe even for how we think about shaping society today. So this is part 1 of 4. We'll have a new one dropping each day this week. Make sure you come back tomorrow to continue this really extraordinary journey with us.
Okay, so let's dive in. Let's open up God Passes By. The foreword itself, it just plunges you right into this moment of immense spiritual weight, a centennial celebration specifically. The text opens by highlighting May 23rd, 1944. And as the author really carefully lays out, this date wasn't just significant for one reason. It had layers. It marked, all at the same time, the 100th anniversary of the founding of the Baha'i Faith itself, the very beginning of the Baha'i dispensation,
Right.
the inauguration of the whole Baha'i era and cycle, and even the birth of Abdu'l-Bahá.
It's incredible, isn't it? So many pivotal moments converging on that single date.
Exactly. It feels like this nexus point in time. And the author, Shoghi Effendi, doesn't waste any time emphasizing just how unique this faith's claims are. He asserts it possesses, and I'm quoting here, no peer or equal in the world's spiritual history. He frames it as the culmination of a universal prophetic cycle.
Yeah, the language used is really powerful.
It is. He says contemplating its potential staggers our imagination, and the brightness of the millennial glory which it must shed dazzles our eyes. He even talks about the author, Bahá'u'lláh, casting a shadow that eludes our calculation on future prophets.
So it's presented not just as, recounting history, but as this fundamental, almost cosmic shift in the spiritual life of the planet.
Precisely. It's setting a very high bar right from the start.
And one of the really striking things, I think, is how the author immediately connects this divine impulse to what's happening in human society. He talks about these mysterious processes from the faith's creative spirit provoking, in less than a century, a tumult in human society such as no mind can fathom.
A tumult, that's a strong word.
It is. He says that while the faith was in its own incubation period, its slowly crystallizing system was already inducing a kind of fermentation in the general life of mankind. And this fermentation, he argues, is actually purposeful. It's designed to shake the very foundations of a disordered society, to purify its lifeblood and ultimately reconstruct its institutions.
So it's not just chaos for chaos' sake. There's a design behind the upheaval.
That's exactly the perspective offered. The text asserts that this profound upheaval we see globally is a direct result of Baha'u'llah's embryonic world order. Baha'u'lláh himself, the text reminds us, stated this order has deranged the equilibrium of the world and revolutionized mankind's ordered life.
Wow.
And the ultimate source of this crisis, it's traced back to the Bab, whose world-shaking, world-energizing, world-redeeming spirit is described as vibrating in the innermost realities of all created things.
So if you look at things through this lens, the crises we see today, they're not just random.
Not according to this view. The text gives specific examples of this planetary upheaval. Think about the convulsions shaking society, the frenzied worldwide ebullitions of men's thoughts, the fierce antagonisms, race, creed, class.
We certainly see plenty of that.
Right. And then the shipwreck of nations, downfall of kings, empires dismembered, dynasties extinguished, the collapse of religious hierarchies, the dissolving of old ties. All of this, it says, has become increasingly severe since World War I, which significantly happened right before the faith's formative age began.
So it offers this radical reframing. Instead of just breakdown, it's a purposeful process, kind of divine clearing of the decks for something new.
Exactly, a divinely driven fermentation, shaking foundations to purify society towards an eventual, perhaps, unity. That's a key insight here for anyone trying to make sense of, well, the state of the world.
Okay, given that really powerful framing, what then specifically was the author's purpose in writing God Passes By? He states it pretty clearly, doesn't he? To survey the outstanding events of the century when this new spirit burst forth.
Yes, but it's more than just a list of dates and events.
Right. He intends to cover the initial stages of its subsequent incarnation in a system that must evolve into an order designed to embrace the whole of mankind. It's an attempt to show how these huge historical happenings have sort of insensibly, relentlessly transformed what started as this heterodox and seemingly negligible offshoot of Shia Islam
Into a world religion. Yeah.
So it's really history interpreted through a spiritual lens. You see this narrative of divine purpose unfolding, even when things look incredibly bleak through all the suffering.
Absolutely. It's a theological interpretation of history in a way.
And the scope of the transformation described is just astounding. The text mentions it spread from Iceland to Magallanes.
Way down south, yeah.
In 60 countries, literature in over 40 languages, multi-million-dollar endowments on 5 continents.
It's quite the list.
It is. Incorporated bodies recognized by governments east and west, adherents from all sorts of races and religions, from the, quote, humblest worker and peasant to royalty itself. Its independent status proclaimed even by its enemies, and it's ranked as the 4th religion in the Holy Land.
Which is incredible considering that's the heartland for Judaism, Christianity, and second only to Mecca for Islam.
It really underscores the global impact. It wasn't just a local phenomenon.
No, definitely not. Which leads naturally to the question, right? How did a movement that started so small, facing such intense, violent opposition, achieve this kind of global reach and transformative power? The text explains this through what it calls the swift interweaving of seeming reverses with evident victories.
Seeming reverses. So setbacks weren't always what they appeared.
Exactly. The first century is described as this series of internal and external crises, varying in severity, often devastating initially. But each crisis, mysteriously, seemed to release a corresponding measure of divine power, which then gave a fresh impulse to its unfoldment.
So like pressure building up and then releasing energy for growth.
Kind of. And this growth would then paradoxically often lead to an even bigger crisis, followed by an even greater outpouring of celestial grace. This enabled the followers to push forward even faster, win bigger victories.
That offers a completely different way to look at challenges, doesn't it? Not just obstacles, but maybe catalysts.
Precisely. A paradox of progress. Suffering and adversity weren't just setbacks. They were integral to the growth and consolidation. It's a powerful perspective on trials, both for individuals and for the community.
The author then breaks down this first century into distinct periods, right?
Yes. 4 distinct periods, each hugely significant, forming successive acts in this, 1, indivisible, stupendous, and sublime drama. First, the heroic, primitive, or apostolic age. That runs from 1844 to 1921. It starts with the Bab's Declaration, includes Bahá'u'llah's mission, and ends with Abdu'l-Bahá's passing. Second, the formative, transitional, or Iron Age. This starts in 1921 with Abdu'l-Bahá's will and testament. And this age is specifically about establishing the administrative order.
The institutions.
Exactly. Which is described as the harbinger, the nucleus and pattern of his world order. And these aren't just separate chunks of time. They're seen as progressive stages in a single evolutionary process. Something vast, steady, and irresistible.
Like a slow maturing.
Yeah, an orderly development, internal consolidation, external expansion, gradually breaking free from old religious constraints, and slowly gaining more civil recognition.
What I find really insightful is how the text traces this chain of revelation unfolding.
Yes, it's very clear. You have the Bab as the forerunner, announcing this divinely conceived order. Then Baha'u'lláh, the promised one, formulating its laws. Then Abdu'l-Bahá, the appointed center, delineating its features, its institutions. And then the present generation of followers tasked with actually erecting the framework of those institutions.
And this evolution is mirrored in the way the faith spread, geographically and demographically.
Absolutely. From its cradle in Persia, it spread east to India, Far East, west to Iraq, Turkey, Russia, Egypt, then across the Atlantic to North America, Europe down to Australia, New Zealand, up to the Arctic, and eventually Central and South America. And this geographic spread brought incredible diversity. It transformed from, an obscure body, chiefly recruited from the ranks of the masses in Shia Persia,
Right.
to this global fraternity representative of the leading religious systems, almost every caste and color, from the humblest worker and peasant to royalty itself.
And the text also mentions other evolutions, like the literature.
Yes, from hidden manuscripts, passed secretly hand to hand, to printed volumes in over 40 languages. The teachings themselves evolved, becoming more expansive. The opposition grew from just Shia clergy to include Sunni and Christian authorities. Institutions went from secret meetings to public houses of worship. The Mashriq al-Adkar, places open to everyone.
The Baha'i temples, yeah.
Exactly. And even pilgrimages became more accessible as the faith grew.
How does this grand sweep of history connect to us today, individually?
Well, I think it provides crucial context for our own spiritual journeys. It shows this incredible resilience, this pattern of overcoming adversity, the inevitable triumph, really, of a divinely guided process, even when the world seems chaotic. It suggests that maybe even our personal trials fit into a larger pattern of growth and purpose.
Okay, let's focus now on the very beginning, the core of this first part of God Passes By, the heroic period starting with the Bab. May 23rd, 1844, as we said, marks the start of what the text calls the most turbulent period of the heroic age, even the most glorious epoch in the greatest cycle which the spiritual history of mankind has yet witnessed.
It's amazing how much happened in such a short time.
It really is, just 9 years, 1844 to 1853. But described as unique in religious history for its sheer dramatic power, the unbelievable rapidity with which events succeeded each other, the Holocaust which baptized its birth, and the miraculous circumstances around the Bab's own martyrdom.
So who exactly was the Bab in this narrative? He's presented as the masker hero. He arose, quote, meteor-like above the horizon of Shiraz. He's identified as the promised Qaim, that's the awaited messianic figure in Shia Islam, the one expected to usher in a new age.
The Sahib-uz-Zaman, Lord of the Age.
Exactly. And he claimed the authority to annul the entire Quranic dispensation. He called himself the primal point, the countenance of God, and Bahá'u'lláh later affirmed that every prophet hath announced his day.
That's a monumental claim.
It is.
Yeah.
And consider the society he appeared in, described as a most decadent race, grossly ignorant, savage, cruel, steeped in prejudice. The text explicitly compares it to the Israelites in Egypt, the Jews in Jesus' time, the idolaters in Muhammad's Arabia. It highlights the immense challenge he faced.
And who were the main forces lined up against it?
Well, the archenemy identified is the Shia priesthood, described as fiercely fanatic, incredibly corrupt, wielding almost unlimited power, and totally opposed to any kind of liberal idea. They'd spent centuries invoking the hidden imam, but when the Bab appeared, fulfilling those prophecies in their view, they rejected him.
Ironic, isn't it?
Deeply. Their willing tools were the Qajar rulers, first Muhammad Shah, then the young Nariddin Shah, who ultimately okayed the Bab's execution, and the arch-villains were the two powerful Grand Viziers, Aji Mirza Akasi, who exiled the Bab, and the absolutely ruthless Amir Nizam Mirza Taqi Khan, who ordered his death.
A formidable array of oppositions.
Truly. But then, in stark contrast, you have the Bab's chosen disciples, the letters of the living, the first 18 believers. They are portrayed as heroes of immense stature, exalted spirit, profound knowledge, incredible eloquence, piety, courage that was just lion-like, and saintly self-sacrifice. They really turned the lives of their countrymen upside down.
Which brings us to the actual moment of declaration. The opening scene described is so intimate, almost quiet, considering the massive implications. An upper room in a modest house in Shiraz, just before sunset, May 22nd, 1844.
Right.
Just two people. The Bab, this 25-year-old Syed, a descendant of the Prophet Muhammad, and Mullah Hussain, who would become the very first to believe. Their conversation lasted all night until dawn, and the city below had absolutely no idea what was happening.
It's a powerful image.
Mullah Hussain's own account of that night is just electrifying. He talks about being spellbound by his utterance, oblivious of time, falling into a state of ecstasy, experiencing all the delights of paradise.
You can almost feel his awe.
You really can. He says, sleep had departed from me. I was enthralled by the music of that voice. But the transformation he described in himself is what's truly striking. He says, how feeble and impotent I had felt previously now, The knowledge of his revelation had galvanized my being. I felt possessed of such courage and power that were the world to rise against me, I would withstand their onslaught. The universe seemed but a handful of dust in my grasp.
Wow. That really captures the transformative power of encountering divine revelation, doesn't it? Even in its quietest beginning, how it can just completely reorient your entire being.
Absolutely. It's a profound testament.
And that powerful personal experience was directly tied to the message the Bab delivered that night. The sheer magnitude of his declaration is backed up by the first chapter of the Qayyum al-Asma. That's his commentary on the Surah of Joseph in the Quran, which he revealed in its entirety right then and there on that first night.
Incredible creative power.
Astonishing. And within it, he made these foundational claims. He declared himself the mouthpiece of God, the one promised by past prophets. Crucially, he also stated he was the herald of one immeasurably greater than himself.
Pointing beyond his own station even then.
Exactly. He issued summonses to kings and princes, dire warnings to the Shah, Muhammad Shah, and a direct command to the Grand Vizier, Akasiya, to basically abdicate his authority. He proclaimed the complete self-sufficiency of his cause and told rulers everywhere to lay aside their power and help spread his message.
These weren't subtle hints.
Not at all. These declarations clearly signaled, as the text says, the dawn of an age that signalizes the consummation of all ages, a completely new chapter for humanity.
So after this earth-shattering declaration to Mullah Hussein, how did the first group of disciples come together? It wasn't immediate, was it? The text says it took 40 days before the other 17 letters of the living started to arrive.
That's right. They found him spontaneously, it seems. Some through dreams, others through prayer and fasting. They were all searching.
And among them were some really remarkable figures. Qudus, only 22, described as the last, but in rank the first. And perhaps most famously, the only woman among them, Táhirih, a poetess from a distinguished background known for her eloquence.
And she never actually met the Bab in person, did she?
No, she didn't. She received her first inkling of the cause in a dream, and she was later given the name Táhirih, the Pure One, by Bahá'u'lláh himself.
A testament to her station.
Indeed. And the Bab's instructions to these first 18 followers were quite profound. Before they dispersed, he gathered them. He urged utmost caution and moderation, but at the same time, he revealed the loftiness of their rank and the sheer magnitude of their responsibilities.
Echoing Jesus' words to his disciples, apparently.
Yes, and emphasizing the greatness of this new day, even hinting at a still mightier day to come, telling them to prepare for it. And Mullah Hussein received a specific mission, didn't he, to go to Iran?
That's right. The Bab alluded to a mystery there that would outshine everything else.
And then these letters of the living scatter across Persia, starting their incredibly dangerous mission, showing, as the text says, matchless heroism against just a savage and concerted onslaught.
That collision with the old order happened almost immediately. In September 1844, the Bab himself went on pilgrimage to Mecca with Qudus. Being a descendant of the Prophet Muhammad, this was significant. He declared his mission there to a leading Sheikhi figure, Mirza Muhyiddin Kirmani, and even invited the Sharif of Mecca himself to embrace the new revelation.
Did the Sharif respond?
Not initially, it seems. But later, after the Bab's martyrdom, the text mentions his indignation, showing the invitation did have some impact eventually. And before leaving Mecca, the Bab's farewell to Qudus contained this chilling prophecy of martyrdom for both of them. Qudus would meet the beloved and die a martyr, and the Bab predicted a similar fate for himself.
Wow, so early on.
Yes. And when the Bab returned to Persia around February or March 1845, his return rocked the entire country. The text describes how this new revelation, being thrust so dramatically upon a race so degenerate, so inflammable, inevitably stirred up the fiercest passions of fear, of hate, of rage, and envy.
And the persecution started quickly.
Immediately. We see examples like Mullah Ali Bastami, one of the letters, being excommunicated, chained, possibly killed. Mullah Ataki Khorasani was publicly scourged with 1,000 lashes just for changing the call to prayer slightly to include the Bab. Even the governor of Fars, Hussein Khan, arrested the Bab, publicly rebuked him, had him struck. Though, surprisingly, there was a brief lull after that.
So how did the message keep spreading against that kind of resistance? Was it just the letters of the living?
Their heroism was crucial, but there were also these moments of powerful conversion. A real aha moment came with Sayyid Yahya Darabi, known as Wahid. He was this incredibly learned scholar sent by the Shah himself to investigate the Bab. But over 3 interviews, he was completely won over.
What happened in the interviews?
In the second one, Vahid was amazed because the Bab answered questions Vahid had prepared but actually forgotten to ask. And in the third, the Bab rapidly revealed a commentary on a short chapter of the Quran, the Surah of Kawthar. The power of this spontaneous revelation just overwhelmed Vahid. He dedicated his life to the faith, saying later he felt as lowly as the dust beneath his feet.
That's incredible. A testament to the Bab's presence.
Absolutely. And this power also converted Mullah Muhammad Ali Zanjani, who became known as Hujjat. He declared that if the Bab said day was night, he'd believe it. Another eminent scholar, Mirza Ahmad Yazgandi, also embraced the cause.
So momentum was building despite the danger.
Definitely. But the situation in Shiraz with Governor Hussain Khan got worse, and he ordered the Bab's arrest again. But then something truly extraordinary happened. A devastating cholera outbreak hit the city. People were dying rapidly.
Divine intervention.
The text certainly presents it that way. The governor's own family got sick, and he fled the city in panic. The chief constable, seeing this, took the Bab home, only to find his own son dying. He begged the Bab's forgiveness. His prayer was answered, and he then pleaded with the fleeing governor to release the Bab, hoping it would stop the plague.
And the governor agreed.
He did, on condition the Bab leave Shiraz immediately. So this outbreak providentially saved the Bab, allowing him to journey north to Isfahan and continue his ministry for a while longer.
So, he arrives in Isfahan, providentially saved from the cholera and the governor. This was around September 1846. It sounds like he found a temporary safe haven there. He was received quite well, wasn't he, by the Imam Jumi, a major religious figure?
Yes, very ceremoniously. And the text says, such was the spell he cast over the people that they were clamoring for the water he used for his ablutions.
A sign of great reverence.
Indeed. And it was in Isfahan, at his host's request, that the Bab revealed his famous commentary on the Surah of Al-Azhar from the Quran.
The one revealed incredibly quickly. That's the one. Writing with astonishing speed in just a few hours, he expounded only on the first letter of that short surah, but produced verses equal in number to about a third of the entire Quran.
Astounding.
The witnesses were apparently so astonished they got up and kissed the hem of his robe. And even the city's governor, Manucher Khan, who was actually a Christian originally, Georgian by birth, he visited the Bab.
What happened there?
He asked the Bab, in front of a group of scholars, to explain and prove the truth of Muhammad's specific mission. The Bab responded readily, and in under 2 hours produced this vigorous original dissertation 50 pages long, not only explaining Muhammad's mission, but linking it directly to the coming of the Qayyim and the return of the Imam Hussain.
On the governor's reaction?
He was convinced. He declared his faith, which you can imagine sent even more alarm bells ringing for the clergy. Here's the Bab, transcending religious lines, converting high-ranking officials.
Yeah, that would definitely raise the stakes and the fear among the established powers. His influence was clearly growing rapidly, and that growing influence inevitably signaled the storm gathering again. The clergy were alarmed, spreading wild rumors to incite the Grand Vizier back in Iran, Haji Mirza Aqqasi. The Bab's popularity was at its peak, but the text says the shadows of an impending doom began to fast gather about him.
So Aqqasi, the Grand Vizier, gets involved.
Yes. He was afraid the Bab might influence the Shah himself, so he denounced the Imam Jumi in Isfahan, who was hosting the Bab, and pushed the local clergy to condemn the Bab to death. The Shah actually summoned the Bab to Iran, but the governor, Manucher Khan, the one who had converted, he temporarily sheltered the Bab, using this ingenious plan to make everyone think the Bab had already left for the capital, while secretly keeping him safe for 4 months.
Brave move.
Very. He apparently wanted to dedicate his considerable wealth to the faith and even try to convert the Shah. But tragically, he died suddenly, something the Bab had actually foretold. His death accelerated the crisis. Manucher Khan's replacement acted ruthlessly. The Bab had to travel disguised, and Aqqasi ultimately diverted him, not to Iran, but to the remote fortress of Maku in the mountains of Azerbaijan, near the Russian border.
So not a meeting with the Shah, but exile and imprisonment.
Exactly. This marked the start of his official long-term incarceration. A period meant to silence him, but paradoxically, it became the very crucible where the faith matured and its deeper truths were really fully unveiled.
And that brings us to this 3-year banishment in the mountains of Azerbaijan. The text calls this the saddest, the most dramatic, and in a sense, the most pregnant phase of his 6-year ministry.
Pregnant with meaning, yeah.
Right, so this covers his time in Maku, about 9 months, then Charikh, with that brief but significant visit to Tabriz in between. And all this time, he's under the shadow of this implacable and mounting hostility from the Grand Vizier's first Akasi and later Amir Nizam.
But crucially, as you said, this period, this harsh confinement, was actually when the new dispensation attained its full stature.
How so?
Well, it's when the Bab's claim was fully and publicly asserted, his laws were formally laid down, and his covenant regarding the Promised One was clearly established.
So Akazi's plan to isolate and silence him completely backfired.
Massively. The text points out how foolish the Grand Vizier was. Little did he imagine that the very isolation would enable him to evolve the system designed to incarnate the soul of his faith. It gave the Bab the space, ironically, to safeguard the faith from potential splits and to formally proclaim his mission without reservation.
What were the conditions like in Maku initially?
Pretty severe, strict orders from the capital. Initially, his room had no door, no lamp at night, just 2 guards and 4 dogs for company. Very harsh confinement. But the Bab's character, his gentleness, modesty, wisdom, gradually won over even the unruly local population.
How did that manifest?
Well, it got to the point where the people's first act every morning, despite the strict warden, Ali Khan, was just to try and catch a glimpse of him. They even started resolving their disputes by invoking his name. Even the warden, Ali Khan, softened up after having a strange vision. He started allowing more pilgrims to visit, like Mullah Hussein, who walked all the way from Mashhad just to see the Bab. The devotion was incredible.
And did this influence continue when he was moved to Charikh? He called that the Grievous Mountain, right?
Yes, his transfer there only seemed to increase the public fervor. Even the local Kurdish population, initially hostile, were won over by his presence.
And wasn't there an account from a European witness around this time?
Yes, a very powerful one. He described the scene. So great was the confluence of the people, the courtyard not being large enough, the majority remained in the street and listened with rapt attention to the verses of the new Quran.
Just imagine that. A prisoner, yet commanding crowds that filled the streets just to hear his words.
It's a striking image. And this period saw more high-profile conversions to distinguished Sayyids, leading clergy, government officials, people like Mirza Asadullah, who became known as Dayan, and even a dervish from India who came after the Bab appeared to him in a vision.
This rising tide of influence must have led to the Tabriz examination. That sounds like a major confrontation.
It absolutely was. The authorities summoned the Bab to Tabriz. They tried to keep his arrival quiet, but excitement still reached a fever pitch. The examination itself was this big gathering of Tabriz's top religious figures, the ecclesiastical dignitaries, and even the crown prince, the Valiad, was there.
What was their goal? To officially denounce him.
That was the plan, to arraign him as a heretic. But instead, the text says, it gave him the supreme opportunity of his mission to assert in public, formally, and without any reservation, the claims inherent in his revelation.
How did he do that? What happened?
It was incredibly dramatic. The Bab apparently walked in and seated himself in the chief place which had been reserved for the Valiad.
Bold move.
Very. And then, in ringing tones, he declared, I am the promised one. I am the one whose name you have for 1,000 years invoked. Verily, I say, it is incumbent upon the peoples of both the East and the West to obey my word and to pledge allegiance to my person.
Just laid it all out there. No ambiguity.
None whatsoever. The immediate effect was this awestruck silence. Then, predictably, a renegade cleric started hurling insults. But the Bab's response was firm. He stated his words were the proof of his mission, citing the Quran, and challenged them to produce anything like his revelation within 2 days. And then he effectively summarily disbanded that gathering by himself, rising and quitting the room.
Wow. He just walked out.
Yeah. A profound act of spiritual defiance. He completely asserted his independent authority, leaving them confounded. Their only recourse was the bastinado beating the soles of his feet, not silencing his claim.
And amidst all this turmoil and confrontation, his captivity actually became a period of immense literary output. Yes, the text says the isolation afforded him the necessary leisure to launch upon his most monumental work. He himself, while in Maku, mentioned his writings already amounted to over 500,000 verses.
500,000 verses.
Incredible, isn't it? Bahá'u'lláh later attested to this, saying, none have yet been able to estimate their number. A score of volumes are now available. How many still remain beyond our reach?
And the range of these writings was huge, right? Not just one type of text.
Exactly. Prayers, sermons, orations, special tablets for visiting holy places, even scientific treatises, doctrinal explanations, exhortations, commentaries on the Quran, letters to dignitaries, and, crucially, the laws and ordinances for his new faith.
Which brings us to two absolutely key works from this period. The Qayyum al-Azma and the Persian Bayan. The Qayyum al-Azma, which remember he started revealing on the very night of his declaration, was called by Bahá'u'lláh the first, the greatest, and mightiest of all books in the Baha'i dispensation.
What was its main purpose?
Fundamentally, the text says it was to forecast what the true Joseph Bahá'u'lláh would endure. It contained those summonses to kings, warnings to the Shah, admonishments to the clergy, and it extolled Bahá'u'lláh, referring to him as the remnant of God and the most great master. It proclaimed the absolute independence and universality of the Babi revelation.
And he even addressed people in the West.
Yes, directly telling the people of the West to issue forth from your cities and aid the cause of God. Quite forward-looking. This book basically served as the Quran of the people of the Bayan for much of the Bab's ministry. It instantly won Baha'u'llah's allegiance when he first encountered it, and its contents really fueled the fires of persecution.
And the Persian Bayan. That came later, during his imprisonment in Makkah.
That's right. The Bayan is described as the monumental repository of the laws and precepts of the new dispensation, but it's also the treasury enshrining most of the Bab's references and tributes to him whom God will make manifest.
So it contained both laws for his own followers and prophecies about Baha'u'lláh.
Precisely. It abrogated specific Islamic laws, prayer, fasting, marriage, divorce, inheritance, while strongly upholding the station of Muhammad as a prophet of God.
Why were some of its own laws described as quite severe?
The text explains they were designedly severe, intentionally so. They were calculated to awaken from their age-long torpor the clergy and the people, and to deliver a sudden and fatal blow to obsolete and corrupt institutions. It was meant to shake things up and announce the arrival of this long-awaited day.
And what about the prophecy of Baha'u'lláh within the Bayan? How explicit was it?
Incredibly explicit. There's a pivotal passage in the third Vahidra, meaning unity or one, and its numerical value is 19, a key number. It says, "Well is it with him, who fixeth his gaze upon the order of Baha'u'lláh, and rendereth thanks unto his Lord, for he will assuredly be made manifest. God hath indeed irrevocably ordained it in the Bayan."
The order of Baha'u'lláh, mentioned by name.
Yes. And this passage directly links, as the commentary points out, to Baha'u'llah's later references in his own most holy book, the Kitab-i-Aqdas, to this most great order, and to Abdu'l-Bahá outlining its features in his will, the very features that guide the Baha'i administrative structure today.
So a clear line of connection.
Absolutely. And the Bab also established what's called a lesser covenant with his followers, specifically about this promised one he was heralding. Unlike previous prophets, whose covenants about their successors were sometimes veiled in symbols, the Bab's was in clear and unequivocal language. It's woven throughout the Persian Bayan, fixing the timing, praising his virtues, asserting the supreme nature of the coming revelation.
What strikes me is the Bab's humility regarding this promised one.
It's profound, isn't it? He says things like, "Were he to appear this very moment, I would be the first to adore him, and I myself am but the first servant to believe in him." And perhaps most powerfully, the whole of the Bayan is only a leaf amongst the leaves of his paradise. Just incredible humility.
Did he give specific dates for when this promised one would appear?
Yes, the text mentions explicit references, phrases like, "In the year 9 you shall attain unto all good," and also at the end of Vahid 19 and the beginning of 1280 AH, "The Lord of the Day of Reckoning will be manifested."
How do those dates line up?
Well, year 9 after the Bab's 1844 declaration points to 1852-53, which is precisely when Baha'u'lláh was imprisoned in the Siyah Shal in Turan and received the first intimations of his own divine mission. And the end of Vahid 19 and beginning of 1280 AH corresponds to the Islamic year 1280, which is about 1863-1864 AD. This aligns with the period when Baha'u'lláh publicly declared his mission in Baghdad, so remarkably precise timings.
It really highlights the Bab's role as the herald.
Definitely, and his final invocation in the Bayan seals it. "Bear thou witness that through this book I have covenanted with all created things concerning the mission of him whom thou shalt make manifest, ere the covenant concerning my own mission had been established." He saw his primary purpose as preparing the way.
So while the Bab is confined in these remote fortresses, revealing these profound truths, his followers are not idle. a really significant event takes place, the Conference of Badasht.
Yes, a pivotal moment. It happened while the Bab was imprisoned. Its purpose was to publicly assert the independence of this new faith.
And Baha'u'lláh played a key role here.
Absolutely. Though the text says he presided unobtrusively, yet effectually, guiding the whole thing. He was in constant touch with the Bab, remember?
Where did it take place?
In 3 rented gardens in a hamlet called Badasht. 81 disciples gathered there as Baha'u'llah's guests for 22 days.
And Baha'u'lláh was revealing tablets daily and giving people new names.
That's right, including the name Baha for himself and significantly Táhirih for Quaratuline the poetess.
Which leads us to the dramatic climax of Badasht Táhirih's unveiling.
Yes, a truly electrifying moment, charged with symbolism. One day, while Baha'u'lláh was unwell, Táhirih, described as this spotless emblem of chastity, appeared before the assembled believers. She was adorned, but unveiled. She went and sat near Qudus, who was apparently affrighted and infuriated.
Unveiling was completely radical at that time and place.
Absolutely shocking. And then, through her fiery words, she tore through the veils protecting Islamic law, sounded the clarion call, and proclaimed the inauguration of a completely new dispensation.
What was the reaction?
Instantaneous and electric, the text says. People were scandalized, fearful, angry, bewildered. One man was so overwrought he cut his own throat. Qudus was apparently mute with rage.
But Táhirih wasn't deterred.
Not at all. Undeterred, unruffled, exultant with joy, she delivered this fervent appeal, declaring, "I am the word which the Qayyim is to utter, the word which shall put to flight the chiefs and nobles of the earth." She basically told them to stop mourning the past and celebrate the dawn of a new spiritual reality.
So this act wasn't just about the veil itself.
No, it symbolized much more. It marked the formal extinction of the old and the inauguration of the new dispensation. It was the death knell, the text says, for the 1,200-year-old law of Islam, a sudden, startling, complete emancipation.
And this had long-term implications.
Profoundly so. This trumpet blast was accelerated by Baha'u'llah's later revelation, leading eventually to the formal annulment of Sharia law in Turkey, its decline in Persia, its separation from the state in Egypt. It paved the way for the eventual recognition of Baha'u'llah's own laws, even in the Holy Land. And of course, it speaks powerfully, even today, to the emancipation of women and the breaking down of outdated religious traditions. It highlights the progressive force of divine revelation on society.
As the Bab's time in prison drew towards its end, the faith entered an even more intense period of upheaval, didn't it? Facing dire convulsions. The text describes this period, 1848 to 1853, as witnessing a degree of heroism and a fierceness of hostility, which had never been witnessed. It's called the bloodiest and most dramatic of the heroic age.
Yes, the Bab formally assuming the authority of the Qayyim seems to have been the trigger, the explosive force that loosed a veritable avalanche of calamities.
How did the opposition react to this?
The clergy became even more emboldened. They hurled anathemas from their pulpits, stirring up their congregations to literally take up arms against the Babis, encouraging looting and violence. They tried to discredit the Bab by demanding traditional signs of the Qayyim, like the appearance of the Antichrist or the Sufyan, using these interpretations to justify their aggression.
And how did the Babis respond to this theological attack?
Their learned and resolute champions didn't shy away. They produced treatises, commentaries, and refutations, affirming Muhammad's station, interpreting obscure traditions masterfully, and drawing parallels to the patient suffering of Imam Isam.
But then the political situation shifted dramatically.
It did. Muhammad Shah died. His Grand Vizier, Akasi, fell from power. The young 17-year-old Nariduddin Mirza became Shah, and he appointed this iron-hearted Amir Nizam, Mirza Taqi Khan, as his prime minister, who immediately decreed immediate and condign punishment for the Babis.
So this marked a new phase, a coordinated attack.
Exactly. The first systematic campaign by the combined civil and ecclesiastical powers. This set the stage for the horrific events that followed, the great conflagrations.
Right, the massacres and sieges of Mazandaran, Nairis, and Zanjan. Let's start with Mazandaran at the fort of Sheikh Abarsi.
This was ignited when Mullah Hossein, the first believer, arrived. He was wearing the Bab's green turban and symbolically hoisted the black standard, a traditional sign foretelling the advent of God's chosen one, leading 202 disciples to support Qudus, who was already there. The conflict that erupted lasted an incredible 11 months. It involved the absolute elite of the Bab's followers. Half the letters of the living died there, including Mullah Hossein and Quddus themselves.
And Bahá'u'lláh was involved here, too.
Yes, though not physically inside the fort for most of it, he was the directive force. The whole episode showcased the indomitable spirit of this small band, about 313 in total untrained students against a huge, well-equipped professional army.
The accounts of heroism are just breathtaking. Mullah Hosein's restraint.
Incredible. He refused to fight until directly attacked, even when 7 companions were killed beside him while he was calling the faithful to prayer. His tenacity was legendary, and the spirit of renunciation among the Babis. They disdained looting the enemy dead, discarded their own belongings, relying only on their faith.
And Bahá'u'lláh actually reached the fort at one point.
Yes. His arrival brought immense joy and coincided with Quddus's miraculous escape from captivity elsewhere, allowing him to join the defenders. Quddus's presence was incredibly inspiring. He chanted verses from his own commentary even while under heavy siege.
But Mullah Hosein's end was tragic.
Heartbreakingly so. On his last day after midnight prayers, wearing the Bab's turban, he led 313 companions in a charge, shouting, Ya Sahibuz Zaman, O Lord of the Age. He broke through 7 enemy barricades only to be hit by a treacherous bullet fired from an ambush.
And the suffering of the besieged was unimaginable.
Unspeakable, extreme hunger. They ate their horses, then grass, bark, leather, even ground bones. At one point, driven by starvation, they apparently had to disinter Mullah Hussein's horse, boil its decomposed flesh and bones, and eat it to survive, living in muddy ditches filled with water.
And it ended in betrayal.
Yes. The prince commanding the army swore a solemn oath on the Quran to guarantee their safety if they surrendered. They did, weakened by starvation, but he violated his oath. The Babis were massacred, sold into slavery, torn apart, brutally killed. His fate was horrific. He was handed over to the clergy in Barfarouche, particularly the diabolical Sayyidul Ulama, stripped naked, paraded through the streets in chains, mutilated, and finally hacked to pieces and his body thrown into a fire. Just barbaric. The horrors just seemed to escalate after Mazandaran. Nairis, in the south, was a parallel upheaval. There, the hero was Vahid, the scholar who had been sent by the Shah to investigate the Bab and ended up converting. He was called the unique and peerless figure of his age.
Were the atrocities similar?
Equally devastating, though the siege itself was shorter. Again, fearless declarations by Vahid, intense hostility from the clergy, leading to massacres. Vahid himself was eventually captured, dragged through the streets, beheaded. His head was stuffed with straw and sent to the capital as a trophy. Women were seen dancing around his mutilated body.
It's hard to even comprehend.
It is. And after Vahid's death, there was a general onslaught. About 5,000 soldiers attacked. Houses were destroyed. Women and children were captured, stripped naked, and forced to march past the impaled heads of their husbands and fathers, who themselves had endured horrific tortures, branding, nails torn out, spikes through hands, strings through noses to lead them like animals.
And then Zenjan. The text says that was even worse.
Yes, even more devastating. Longer duration, more victims, around 1,800 martyrs are estimated. The central figure there was Hujat, the other great scholar who had instantly believed. The conflict literally divided the city's population. Families, friends, old ties dissolved in favor of this mightier loyalty to the Bab. Hujat constantly urged his followers not to be the aggressors, telling them their true victory was in sacrifice.
Were there stories of unusual heroism there too?
Absolutely. The text highlights the incredible audacity of Zainab, a village maiden. She disguised herself as a man to fight alongside the defenders and apparently fought heroically for 5 months, barely eating or sleeping. There's also a story of the Babi guards causing panic in the enemy camp just by loudly shouting the Bab's invocations at night, a stupendous uproar.
The contrast between the two sides must have been stark.
Immense. The text describes the disorder, the cursing, the ribald laughter, the debauchery in the army camp versus the reverent devotion, anthems of praise and hymns of joy among the besieged Babis, even amidst starvation.
Was there betrayal there as well?
Yes, again. The besiegers used a sealed copy of the Quran to falsely appeal for peace, then captured the Babi delegation sent to negotiate, imprisoned, and mutilated them. Hujat himself showed incredible magnanimity even after his own wife and child were killed in the fighting. He continued urging forbearance until he finally died from a wound.
And the aftermath?
Savage revenge. Victims were publicly tortured, exposed to freezing cold, had boiling oil poured on them. They even disinterred Hujat's corpse to drag it through the streets. Lord Curzon, the British statesman, later called it a terrific siege and slaughter.
Even in Iran, the capital, there was intense persecution before the Bab's martyrdom, wasn't there? The 7 martyrs.
Yes, about 4 months before the Bab's execution, this tragedy unfolded. It was like a prelude to the later massacres after the attempt on the Shah's life. These 7 individuals came from different walks of life, and what stands out is their absolute refusal to recant, even just with their lips. The practice of taqi, allowed under Shia law to save one's life under duress.
They refused to even pretend to deny their faith.
Deliberately refused. Despite pleas from family, offers of huge ransoms, even direct intervention from high officials like the Amir Nizam himself in the case of Aji Mirza Syed Ali, who was the Bab's maternal uncle and basically his guardian. None of them would yield.
The resolve must have been extraordinary.
Awe-inspiring, the accounts suggest. Defiant answers, ecstatic joy, jubilant shouts, even competing with each other to be the first to be martyred.
And the indignities continued even after death.
Horrifically so. Their bodies were left unburied in a public square, the Sabzi Maidan, for 3 whole days, subjected to kicks, spitting, curses, and refuse thrown by thousands of people described as devout Shias. All this news, the fall of Shoghi, the massacres at Nairis and Zanjan, the deaths of his beloved disciples, it reached the Bab in his prison, didn't it? Yes, and the impact was devastating. The text says he suffered unutterable sorrow for 6 months. His chronicler noted he was unable to write or dictate, just completely crushed by grief. He refused food and drink for 9 days at one point, just weeping constantly. Think about the losses he was hearing about, blow after blow.
The pillars of his faith, as the text calls them.
Exactly. Qudus, second only to the Bab himself in rank, suffering a death, Bahá'u'lláh said, even Jesus Christ had not faced. Mullah Hossein, the very first believer, the Babul Bab, Vahid and Hushat, those brilliant scholars, even his own maternal uncle executed in Tehran. Half of his original 18 letters of the living were gone.
And he knew his own end was approaching.
He did. He'd already alluded to his 6th Nowruz, Persian New Year, being his last. He'd expressed a deep longing for martyrdom in his writings. The Qayyumul Azma had even prophesied it. And significantly, about 40 days before he was taken from his prison in Tariq for the last time, he gathered all his important documents, his seals, his rings, everything.
And entrusted them to someone.
Yes, to Mullah Bakir, one of the letters of the living, with specific instructions to deliver them safely to Baha'u'lláh in Iran. A clear sign he was preparing for the end and ensuring the cause would continue.
So with these upheavals still raging in places like Zanjan, the Prime Minister, Amir Nizam, decides the only way to stop the faith is to execute the Bab himself.
Exactly. He was convinced repression wasn't working, that it only fueled the Bab's zeal. So he concluded that only the Bab's death could extinguish the movement.
And he acted independently, against the Shah's orders.
The text says he bypassed an explicit order from the sovereign not to harm the Bab and commissioned his own brother to carry out the execution in Tabriz, likely fearing the public reaction if it happened in the capital, Iran.
Even the religious leaders who condemned him wouldn't face him.
That's right. The leading mujtahids of Tabriz signed his death warrant but refused to meet him personally, a sign of their own unease, perhaps.
And just before the execution, there were those significant interruptions.
Yes, 2 very telling incidents. First, the executioner barged in while the Bab was in a confidential talk with his secretary, Sidat Sayan. The Bab calmly told him, "Not until I've said to him all those things that I wish to say can any earthly power silence me." He asserted his spiritual authority even then.
And the second involved the commander of the firing squad.
Yes, Sam Khan, the colonel of the Armenian Christian regiment assigned the task. He was apparently distressed, fearing divine retribution. The Bab reassured him, saying, "Follow your instructions, and if your intention be sincere, the Almighty is surely able to relieve you of your perplexity." Words that would soon prove prophetic. So we come to the day itself, July 9th, 1850. The execution in the barracks square in Tabriz. It became this incredible display of divine power. The Bab and his young disciple, Anis, who had begged to die with him, were suspended by ropes against a wall.
And the first volley of shots.
750 rifles fired. The smoke filled the square, but when it cleared, the crowd of about 10,000 people was stunned. The Bab had completely vanished. Anis was standing there, alive and totally unharmed, the ropes binding them severed and shredded by the bullets.
He just vanished. Where did they find him?
Back in the very room he'd been occupying before being let out, calmly finishing his interrupted conversation with his secretary, Syed Hussein. He told the bewildered officials, "I have finished my conversation. Now you may proceed to fulfill your intention."
The impact on the executioners must have been immense.
Profound. The head executioner immediately resigned on the spot. And Sam Khan, the Christian colonel, remembering the Bab's words about being relieved of his perplexity, refused point-blank to order his regiment to fire again. He marched his men away.
So they needed a new firing squad.
Yes. A Muslim regiment under an officer named Aqwa Jani Kamsi volunteered, perhaps eager for favor or out of fanaticism. They suspended the Bab and Anis again. This time, the volley found its mark. Their bodies were riddled with bullets, fused together, completely shattered, except, miraculously, their faces remained largely untouched.
And the Bab's last words.
Addressed to the crowd, "O wayward generation, had you believed in me, every one of you would have followed the example of this youth. The day will come when you will have recognized me. That day I shall have ceased to be with you." A final warning and prophecy.
Were there other unusual events reported?
Yes, supernatural phenomena. The moment the second volley hit, a violent gale swept Tabriz, and a whirlwind of dust blacked out the sun for hours. Later, a severe earthquake struck Shiraz, the Bab's birthplace, and the fate of the soldiers involved, quite striking. Of Sam Khan's original regiment, 250 died in an earthquake that same year. 3 years later, the remaining 500 were executed for mutiny. And the prime minister, Amir Nizam, who ordered the death, and his brother who carried it out, both met violent ends within 2 years.
What happened to the Bab's remains immediately after?
They were thrown out near the city moat, guarded. The Russian consul apparently had a drawing made. But then, a devoted Babi, Aji Suleiman Khan, daringly retrieved the bodies under cover of darkness and concealed them. Later, following Baha'u'llah's specific instructions, the remains were secretly transported, eventually reaching Iran. And finally, decades later, Abdu'l-Bahá arranged for their solemn final interment in the shrine on Mount Carmel.
An incredible journey, even after death.
Truly. And the text emphasizes the uniqueness of this martyrdom. The Bab's life stands at this confluence of two universal prophetic cycles, ending the Adamic cycle, beginning the Baha'i cycle. His death culminates the most heroic phase of the dispensation and is described as unparalleled in the annals of the lives of all the founders of the world's existing religious systems.
The narrative draws quite striking parallels between the Bab's life and death and that of Jesus Christ.
Yes, it highlights similarities. Their youthfulness, the short, turbulent ministries ending in violent death, establishing an apostolic order, challenging entrenched traditions, the key role of the religious hierarchy in their persecution, the indignities suffered arrest, interrogation, mockery, scourging, public humiliation, and finally that ignominious suspension before a hostile crowd.
But it also points out a key difference, doesn't it?
It does. The Bab isn't just seen as a prophet like Jesus, but as the independent author of a divinely revealed dispensation and the herald of a new era, an inaugurator of a vast new prophetic cycle. Also, while Jesus primarily faced the Jewish religious leaders, the Bab faced the combined power of both the state and the dominant Islamic clergy in Persia.
And this dramatic story didn't just stay within Persia. It captured attention worldwide.
Absolutely. The text mentions the widespread and keen interest it stirred, particularly in Europe. People wrote poems about it, plays. The famous actress Sarah Bernhardt apparently wanted a play written about the Babi tragedy. Scholars and writers offered tributes, calling his followers' courage magnificent, referring to the Bab as a true God-man, the finest product of Persia, the Jesus of the age. Some saw the movement itself as the most important religious movement since Christianity. This global recognition really underlines the impact he had, and the Bab station is described with such exalted language, such diverse titles.
Yes, an incredible list. Essence of essences, sea of seas, the point round whom the realities of the prophets and messengers revolve, morn of truth, harbinger of the most great light, primal point, mystic fane, great announcement, flame of Sinai, the remembrance of God.
It positions his advent as this pivotal turning point, signalizing the end of the entire prophetic cycle, which had lasted thousands of years, and the beginning of the cycle of fulfillment. He fulfilled the promises of past ages and ushered in the consummation of all previous revelations.
How exactly did his coming fulfill so many different prophecies from various religions?
The text explains this quite thoroughly. For Shia Muslims, he was the awaited Qaim. For Sunnis, the Mahdi. For Christians, the return of John the Baptist. For Zoroastrians, the promised Ushid Arma. For Jews, the return of Elijah. His revelation, it says, manifested the signs and tokens of all the prophets.
And it lists specific prophecies from the Bible and the Quran.
An extensive list, yes. Things like the second woe, from Revelation, the two messengers, the trumpet blast, events signifying the day of judgment, like the inevitable, the resurrection, the earthquake of the last hour, the heavens being cleft, angels descending, stars falling, the earth giving up its burdens, paradise being brought near, the book being set, the balance established, mountains scattered.
Wow.
And also from Daniel and Jesus, the cleansing of the sanctuary, the references to specific time periods like 40 and 2 months, the time of the end, the two witnesses, and even the man-child destined to rule. It's presented as the culmination of millennia of expectation.
So, his martyrdom wasn't an end, but a necessary step, the seed being planted.
Exactly. The clarion call to the world's rulers had been sounded. The blueprint for a new order was announced in the Bayan. The laws were laid down. The crucial covenant about Bahá'u'lláh was established. The light had spread. The forces of darkness had reacted with predictable ferocity. But through it all, the nucleus of the divinely ordained, world-embracing community had been formed. His martyrdom, that seed being trampled, paradoxically allowed it to germinate and remanifest itself in the shape of a still more compelling revelation, the revelation of Bahá'u'lláh. It perfectly sets the stage for what comes next.
But before Baha'u'llah's revelation could fully emerge, the faith faced yet another horrific crisis, didn't it? The attempt on the Shah's life.
Yes, a major turning point with terrible immediate consequences. This happened in August 1852, about 2 years after the Bab's martyrdom.
And the text frames this too as one of those periodic crises that, despite seeming fatal, ultimately served a purpose, a blessing in disguise.
That's the interpretation given, that it acted as a providential means for the release of a fresh outpouring of celestial strength, fulfilled prophecies about suffering, and perhaps served as an instrument for the purification of the community itself.
What actually happened? Who made the attempt?
It was carried out by two young Babis, Adiki Tabrizi and Fatullah Ikumi. They were apparently driven to despair by the relentless persecution and sought revenge for the Bab's death. The text calls it an act of folly.
And the repercussions were immediate and brutal.
Instantaneous and horrific. Unimaginable tumult erupted where the Shah was. His ministers panicked, and a massive storm of public horror, disgust, and resentment, actively fanned by the Shah's powerful mother, swept across Persia. This gave the faith's enemies the perfect pretext they'd been waiting for to try and discredit and annihilate it completely.
Leading to the reign of terror.
Yes, atrocities revolting beyond description. The new Grand Vizier deliberately divided up the executions among different groups: princes, ministers, generals, clergy, merchants, guilds, even involving the Shah himself, ensuring the whole ruling class participated in this blood revenge.
What kinds of torture were inflicted? The descriptions are harrowing.
They truly are. Adik, one of the assailants, had his body dragged through the streets and cut in half. His accomplice had molten lead poured down his throat. Others had holes pierced in their bodies where lighted candles were inserted while they were forced to walk or dance. Red-hot pincers tore flesh, screws crushed limbs, eyes were gouged out. Some were sawn asunder, blown from cannons, chopped to pieces, shod like horses, bayoneted, stoned.
It's almost unbelievable.
Women and children weren't spared the horror. They were led through streets with their flesh in ribbons, candles burning in the ruins, yet reportedly singing praises. Fathers chose to have their own young sons' throats cut rather than deny their faith.
Were there outside witnesses to this?
Yes. Captain von Gemoyms, that Austrian officer in the Shah's army, wrote a horrified account. He described seeing victims forced to eat their own amputated ears, having their skulls crushed, burning wicks inserted under their nails, feet skinned and dipped in boiling oil, then forced to run. He resigned in disgust, calling it a day perhaps unparalleled in the history of the world. Renan, the French historian, echoed that sentiment.
And this wave of persecution also claimed the life of Táhirih.
Tragically, yes. This fierce gale, as the text calls it, finally extinguished the light of Táhirih, the immortal heroine. Her meteoric career was now about to attain its final consummation.
Tell us more about her. She was clearly an extraordinary figure.
Absolutely. Born the same year as Bahá'u'lláh, incredibly intelligent, beautiful, highly respected by scholars even before she became a Babi, known by titles like Zarin Taj, Crown of Gold, and Qurratulain, Solace of the Eyes, before Baha'u'lláh named her Táhirih, the Pure One.
And she was utterly fearless in promoting the Bab's cause.
Completely. Despite intense opposition from her own family and the clergy, her eloquence in pleadings, denunciations, poems, translations captivated people across Persia and Iraq. She debated and confounded the most learned clerics. She translated the Qayyum al-Azma. She skillfully managed the faith's affairs in Qazvin. Remember her challenging Vahid in Bahá'u'llah's house. Her influence, especially among women in Ifan, was immense. The flower of feminine society came to hear her.
And her death sentence came after confronting officials.
Yes, after 7 conferences with the Grand Vizier's deputies where her passionate defense of the faith apparently sealed her fate.
How did she face her end?
With incredible serenity and dignity. On her final night, she dressed in bridal attire, anointed herself with perfume, confided her last wishes, and spent the night in prayer and chanting, awaiting martyrdom. She was then taken to a garden at night and strangled, reportedly with a silken kerchief, fulfilling her own desire not to have her blood shed by her executioners and her body thrown into a deep well.
Her legacy is immense, particularly concerning the emancipation of women.
Absolutely. Her famous last words encapsulate it. You can kill me as soon as you like, but you cannot stop the emancipation of women. Her fame spread to Europe. Scholars and artists admired her. Abdu'l-Bahá placed her alongside figures like Sarah, Mary, and Fahmy, calling her eloquence a calamity of the age. Lord Curzon, Professor E.G. Brown, Comte de Gobineau, many paid tribute. Brown famously wrote, had the Baha'i religion no other claim to greatness, this were sufficient, that it produced a heroine like Qurratulain. Her example continues to inspire countless people. So, amidst all this carnage, with figures like Táhirih falling, Baha'u'lláh emerges as the central figure, doesn't he? The most redoubtable adversary and the sole hope of the faith.
His role had been pivotal all along, even if sometimes behind the scenes.
Exactly. From his instant recognition of the Bab's revelation, his being the one alluded to in the Bab's writings, his tireless work fostering the faith's growth, his intimate connections with all the leading disciples, Vahid, Hujat, Qudus, Mullah Hussein, Táhirih, he was the one clarifying principles, guiding actions, averting dangers. He gave up his noble status, his wealth, everything, to champion this cause fearlessly.
He guided the Baidash Conference, shielded Qudus and Táhirih.
He arranged for Qudus's release at Abarsi. He endured imprisonment and beatings himself for the faith. And crucially, he was the one who ensured the Bab's remains were rescued and hidden. He was constantly organizing, guiding, protecting.
His prominence must have made him a target after the attempt on the Shah's life.
Inevitably. He was the most conspicuous figure remaining. Accusations flew, the Shah's wrath focused on him. Even though the Russian minister tried to offer protection, Baha'u'lláh chose not to flee and was eventually handed over to his enemies.
And taken to the infamous Siyah-Chal, the Black Pit.
Yes, that odious and cruel dungeon in Iran. Baha'u'lláh himself described it vividly in his later writings, like the Epistle to the Son of the Wolf, he wrote. We were consigned for 4 months to a place foul beyond comparison. The dungeon was wrapped in thick darkness and highways. Our fellow prisoners numbered nearly 150 souls, thieves, assassins, and highwaymen. No pen can depict that place, nor any tongue describe its loathsome smell.
The conditions were appalling.
Unspeakable. Feet in stocks. Shackled with the notorious Karagohar chain around his neck so heavy it left marks for the rest of his life, linking him to several other Babis. Denied food and drink for the first 3 days and nights. The place was freezing, damp, filthy, crawling with vermin. There is even an attempt to poison him.
Abdu'l-Bahá saw him during this time, didn't he?
Yes, as a young boy. He testified later how Baha'u'lláh was terribly altered, so ill he could hardly walk, neck galled and swollen, body bent by the weight of his chains. This intense suffering, endured in the very place where he would receive the first stirrings of his own divine revelation, just underscores the depth of sacrifice at the heart of the Baha'i story. It's that theme again, adversity transformed into spiritual power.
So all this immense suffering, these torrents of blood poured out by the Baba, Táhirih, Qudus, Vahid, Hujat, the 7 martyrs, Baha'u'lláh himself, and countless others, it wasn't meaningless.
Not at all, according to the Baha'i perspective presented here. They were the fertile seeds, the text says, of that world order which is swiftly succeeding and still greater revelation was to proclaim and establish.
Baha'u'lláh himself paid tribute to their sacrifice, didn't he?
Poignantly so, he wrote. The whole world marveled at the manner of their sacrifice. The mind is bewildered at their deeds. Have any age witnessed such momentous happenings? And he affirmed that virtues like patience and faithfulness were essentially begotten only by their deeds. Their actions gave substance to these spiritual qualities.
And this suffering also filled specific prophecies.
Yes. The text mentions the Prophet Muhammad's longing to see his brethren who will appear at the end of the world. and also the Hadithi Jabir, a tradition authenticated by Bahá'u'lláh, which predicted that God's saints in the last day shall be abased. Their heads shall be exchanged as presents. They shall be slain and burned.
Even the outside observers recognize the extraordinary nature of this heroism.
Right. We mentioned Curzon, Renan, Brown, Gobineau. They all acknowledged the magnificent heroism, the incredible courage and devotion shown by the Babis, recognizing the potential of this new faith even as it faced annihilation. And what about the persecutors? Did they face any consequences according to this narrative?
Oh, yes. The text is very explicit that the rod of divine chastisement, swiftly and with unyielding severity, spared neither the chief magistrate, nor his ministers, nor the ecclesiastical dignitaries.
It lists specific examples. Muhammad Shah, who ignored the Bab's appeal, died relatively young, condemned to hellfire by the Bab. His advisor, Akasi, fell from power and died disgraced and poor. The ruthless Amir Nizam, responsible for so much bloodshed, was himself treacherously killed soon after. The governor of Shiraz, who first struck the Bab, died obscurely. The fanatical cleric Sayyidul Ulama suffered a dreadful disease. The officer who supervised Táhirih's death was ruined. The executioner who killed the 7 martyrs was hanged. Mahmud Khani Kalantar, who oversaw Táhirih's death, was hanged. Even the regiment that fired the final volley at the Bab met disastrous ends.
A clear pattern of retribution described.
Very clear. And it extended beyond the leaders to the populace, too, whose gross ignorance, their ferocious bigotry, and savage cruelty were seen as inviting divine judgment. The Bab had pointed to the cholera outbreak as a sign. Nabil, the historian, recorded widespread plagues, famine, misery afflicting the land, even affecting animals and plants. The text concludes that the people and government drank the cup of woe to its dregs, utterly unregardful of the hand which had brought it, and of the person for whose sake they were made to suffer. It serves as a powerful, if grim, historical lesson on the consequences of opposing what is presented as God's cause.
Wow. Well, this has been an incredibly intense, but truly insightful deep dive into just the first part of God Passes By. We've covered so much the profound beginnings of the Baha'i Faith, the almost unbelievable sacrifice of the Bab and his first followers, the way prophecy seemed to unfold even amidst the most brutal persecution, and laying the groundwork for understanding Baha'u'llah's pivotal role.
It's powerful material. And these events, though they happened over 170 years ago, they feel strangely relevant today, don't they? Maybe a thought for you, the listener, to ponder is this. How do these themes, spiritual independence, the underlying unity of religion, the idea of divine purpose unfolding, even through intense suffering, how might they offer us a different lens for viewing our own turbulent times? How might the resilience and sacrifice we've discussed inform our own responses to challenges? And how does this concept of divine will actively shaping society, even through upheaval, resonate with what you see happening in the world right now?
That's definitely something to reflect on. A very powerful thought. And remember, everyone, this was just part 1 of our special 4-part deep dive into God Passes By. We have really only just begun to explore the richness of this extraordinary text. We'll be continuing the journey tomorrow, unlocking more insights. So please be sure to join us for the next installment. And one last reminder, if you found this valuable, please do subscribe and follow Baha'i on Air. Your support really does help us keep these conversations going. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to having you back with us tomorrow.